right, everybody, welcome back. My name's Eric. I'm a law punk, degen, lawyer, crypto native. Just before we get going, I'm just going to echo something that Charles said earlier, which is, the law's been around for a long time, and just because there's new technology doesn't mean the law necessarily changes, right? It's cold in here. If I want to rent your jacket from you, right? And you say, wow, you want to pay me $100 to rent that jacket for 10 minutes? And then you say, hey, guess what, Eric? I'd like you to rent my jacket all day. I'll give you a discount for the first 2 hours. That's not new law, right? So earlier, somebody talked about multi-sigs. So I guess we're going to go down and ask people to introduce themselves a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourselves. And I feel like multi-sig is going to be a topic here. Please go ahead.
Awesome. My name is Jordan Teague. I am a practicing attorney at the firm of Campbell Teague in Greenville, South Carolina. We started off doing traditional law stuff, corporate work, business litigation, but now I'm pretty much full-time, headfirst into Web3, whether it's an NFT project that needs advice or a DAO that needs help figuring out life. We can help any Web3 project that needs it.
Hey guys, pleasure to be here. My name is Nicolas. I'm the founder of MetaGameUp DAO. And what we basically do in a nutshell is creating open metaverse experiences by, on the one hand, having a portfolio, a metaverse agnostic portfolio of metaverse assets, right? And complementary to this, we build, dApps that basically support the user's metaverse journey. And apart from that, I'm also the founder of DAC, which is a DAO and metaverse incubator. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
My name is George Dowd. I'm an attorney based in Chicago, Illinois. Kind of an interesting background, but the majority of my career was trading hedge funds and currencies, which is kind of how I moved into the space. And I do a lot of work with companies in the space.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evgheny. I'm a founder of Re7 Capital. We are a DeFi fund that provides liquidity to the ecosystem, and in the meantime, helps DAOs manage their treasury. So as a member of a few DAOs, we realized that there is a need for professional and regulatory-friendly money management for anyone involved in Web3, and that's what we do. Thank you.
Nice, I love it. Such a good panel. All right, so why don't we start off with a couple questions, maybe multi-sig signers. Is that just servants of the community, or is that an executive branch of governors?
Anyone?
Yeah, I think I can begin here. I think, right now it is, as DAOs, when they begin, really are a bit more centralized, we have to be honest, right? I would say it is more like an executive branch, especially in the beginning when the founders inherit this role. But I think if a DAO has the right intentions, right, and actually is fostering the decentralization, it will just be kind of maybe also a changing role that is also based on, for instance, continuous trust and contributions and reputational based governance that has an impact on this. And therefore, I think that's kind of the direction where it's headed.
Yeah, and I guess just to jump in there, I would agree. I think that in most multi-sig setups, kind of the idea, right, is maybe you have a snapshot vote, some sort of a vote that reflects kind of the will of the community, and then the multi-sig acts on that. So in that way, it really is executory, as opposed to sort of the brains of the operation making decisions on behalf of the people.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that, it's a compromise, right? So ideally, you want the community to manage the funds, but it's impossible for even 10 people to come and make a proper decision. So you have to outsource that and delegate that to hopefully a trusted group of advisors who cannot collude very easily. So at the moment, it's one of the only ways to get something done.
I would echo what Jordan said. I think it's an executive. I sort of view it as an executive group that's beholden to the community. So not acting on their own unless that authority has been delegated to them by the community, but more implementing the will of the community in some sense.
Yeah, and then there's some like operational parts to that, like the speed at which crypto moves, right? If you needed to vote for everything, you're usually voting on something from 3 weeks ago, right? Because the opportunity or the risk has already happened. So in keeping with multi-sig signing powers, Any thoughts on, like, is there any risk to a key holder?
No, just kidding. Yes, there's absolutely risks. I think really the most obvious one is just the risk that you accidentally screw something up, right? Negligence. And it can be tempting, I think, on a multi-sig if you're just confirming a transaction that someone else has set up to just kind of rubber stamp it and click the button. But there's risk there too, right? Because if you've signed up for being on this multi-sig, then you've basically signed up for taking the responsibility of making sure that the right thing is done with the funds. And so I think that's just the most obvious low-hanging fruit risk, is the risk of accidentally screwing up either because you did it wrong or you didn't do the diligence to look into what the transaction is that you're confirming.
Yeah, I think also I fully agree with what you said, and I think really the most crucial part here is really to protect, so to say, the key holders in that sense, right, of their liability, right? And I think that's where you guys are, of course, the experts from the legal side, but I think that's really the most important thing that we should focus on right now when it comes to also the legal aspects and the protection of the treasury managers in that sense. Yeah, I think personally at some point, at least in my utopian vision, so to say, all these processes will be full autonomous, right? Because right now we more have like DOs than DAOs, right? DAOs are not really that autonomous yet. But I think once they are as much autonomous as possible, we won't have these issues anymore, because there's not many of these attack points also for the regulators if it's a fully autonomous and algo-based process in that sense. Yeah.
So look, Nicolas said a word that I was thinking about while he was speaking, which is, I think that the signers on the multisig can present another attack point. Whereas if there are legal issues and someone's trying to define a subset of people to sort of pay more attention to, that can, in some circumstances, I think, be the signers of the multisig, which can be concerning. And I think it's not contemplated enough or seriously enough in the formation stages of many DAOs.
Just to finish up on that, completely agree with everything that's been said. And, just from experience, having seen quite a few DAOs, and Eric, to your point, there is so much happening in crypto that when you're signing something, you're backward looking rather than forward looking. And you have some people in the space who are very trusted, they're very reliable, but they're on 20 multisigs. So they don't even know what they're proving because they have no time to understand the transaction. And half of the time, you don't even understand the transaction anyway, unless you spend a lot of time. And that's clearly a problem, because then you just end up following someone who approved it before you, and then it kind of defeats the purpose. So I think there's a lot of work that's needed on the operational fixes for that.
Is there anything a treasury manager can do to sort of separate themselves from any risk or liability?
That's a good question. I think taking a step back and to what has been discussed, even though it's DeFi and it's decentralized, it doesn't mean that regulation doesn't suddenly apply. So when you're managing someone else's money, you take on liability as an institution or as an individual. And it's an illusion to think that because it's a smart contract, you will not be held accountable for what you do. So I think that's the first and foremost decision that people have to make. And what we've seen is that software developers who are building all these amazing apps, they're not necessarily money managers, and they don't want to take the burden of having this regulatory axe hanging over their necks, and they outsource it, whether they outsource it to a decentralized entity like Yorn or others, or to centralized and regulated entities, is a different decision they have to make. But it's a bit risky, to say the least, to do it in-house for regulatory and operational and just money management reasons.
Yeah, and so setting up an LLC or an entity like that to kind of be a shield between you and your personal assets and what you're doing on behalf of an organization can obviously be really smart. But I think that sometimes what gets lost in that conversation is the things that you need to do the LLC thing right and actually keep the limited liability protection in place. There's this thing called the corporate veil, which is just a fancy legal way of saying you have liability protection in LLC. But a creditor can potentially pierce the corporate veil if you do certain things wrong and out of step. And that's probably a little out of scope of the discussion for today. But I would just note, an LLC is not a cure-all, but I think, it's a really smart thing to do. And there is a Web3 solution, a Web3 native solution that is kind of emerging. You might have heard Ross Campbell speak earlier. He and I are working on DAO together. We've integrated something called Ricardian LLC that you can actually just use standalone as well. It's a smart contract out there. It's a public good. And you can spin up your own Web3 native LLC just through one click. So there are even Web3 native ways to do that. But just make sure if you do set up an entity that you consult a lawyer to make sure that you're actually utilizing the entity well so that you get the protection at the end of the day.
So by Web3, you mean like I can just pay with ETH from my wallet without touching the meat space?
Bingo.
Okay. And just so I'll just summarize there, like, so the average retail person that's aped into a DAO and is suddenly finds themselves as the multi-sig key holder, one thing they can do is set up a LLC that doesn't do anything else, doesn't touch anything else in the world, and maybe like the constituting documents only says it's to hold this wallet, nothing else. Is that where we're going?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable strategy. And, George, you may have some thoughts on that too, but, it's not a cure-all, like I said. You can't stop crazy. Anyone can sue anyone for anything here in the US, and it happens. But having that initial layer of protection, I think, is a really wise strategy.
Well, Eric, I would start by saying that nothing I say here today could be construed as legal advice.
Of course, we're just having a conversation by the fire.
However, yes, I think that that is one smart way to go, generally speaking, because the LLC will provide you with typically some degree of protection.
Yeah, and also from my side, maybe one point to add is, of course, you can stay anonymous. That's also something that some, at least lawyers I spoke with, suggested, that you just stay anonymous, and that's also what a lot of the projects are doing. And so I think like kind of a mixture between staying at least, partly anonymous and having that, let's say, personal holding in place that protects you from liability, I think, at least from my side, is the most feasible approach right now. Let's hope in the future there will be, let's say, less friction-infused processes, but right now that's, in my opinion, really the only way to go. Yeah, but I also have to say no legal advice, and I'm not a lawyer here, so that's just my personal take.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. Does anybody else have any like burning thought on multi-sig before we switch topics and maybe go to something else? Okay. So fiduciary responsibility of DAO governors. So I got a couple of questions here that we asked some people, and one of them is about when your treasury contains the voting tokens for another DAO, like how do you go about that? Like how are you going to vote for Yearn with your DAO treasury tokens? Like what is there any responsibility there, like towards the DAO members, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think as the treasury managers, should always act on behalf of the entire DAO, right? It should just be something where basically if the DAO participates in another DAO, then the respective, so to say, DAO just makes a vote about how they're going to approach this respective, other vote in another DAO. That's just kind of my take. Yeah. I don't think that the treasury managers should like single-handedly make decisions just because they have the keys to the treasury.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you might be identifying is the potential for a conflict of interest if the two DAOs might have slightly competing objectives. And so I think this is partially a legal problem and partially a design problem. We see with DAOs that are managed by tokens that are mapped to their economic interests, where you can just buy as many as you want. I think we're seeing design failures in that anyway, right? And so it's worth asking, should you set up a DAO like that where another DAO could just buy a bunch of your tokens and then take control? But from a legal standpoint, I think that it's a valid question, and you do have to remember that, especially say you're organized here in the United States and you're an LLC in a jurisdiction that says members can't compete with the company. Well, now you might be actually violating that duty, that fiduciary duty to the company.
Yeah, like there's a lot of DAOs that do DAO to DAO Treasury swaps, and then there's no real, well, it wouldn't be Web 3.0 if there was a restriction on it, right? And then those tokens can end up somewhere else. So one of them could still hold those tokens, and the other one doesn't. And then you can wash out a few votes. It's kind of a interesting conversation to have, I guess. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I've got no idea on the legal aspect of any of this, right? But from the business and the financial perspective, that's a feature, not a bug in DeFi. That's inevitable, and it'll continue to happen. And what we've seen is that there are multi-billion-dollar DAOs built on top of other DAOs, right? Where their only objective is to accumulate tokens of somebody else and then use them to vote and do whatever they need to do. And that's the whole point of composability in the space, right? So I don't think it can be stopped. Maybe lawyers can stop it, but it'll be pretty hard. And I don't think that will go away. And I think over time it will become more and more important because everything is extremely intertwined in the space.
Okay, well, why don't we switch to stablecoin talk? What's the role of a stablecoin in a treasury? Anybody?
It's there to protect you during the next bear market. I think there have been a lot of very large ICO raises in 2017, 2018, and those projects raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and they kept money in their own governance token. And we all know what happened to many of them. It's not really rocket science. It's pretty much common sense that keep money in dollars or an equivalent of that versus risky assets. And there are now even projects with automation tools which allow you as a DAO to sell your assets into stablecoins once a day, once a block, or what have you. And without that, you're not really running a business. You're running a hedge fund, which is a great business model, but probably you raise money for something else.
So I'd agree with that, and I'd take it a little bit further. I think, look, the general consensus, I think, in the space is that, and I'll get eye rolls when I say this, but that you want to have 2 to 3 years worth of development funds, or the funds that you would need for 2 to 3 years worth of development in stablecoins. And anytime I say that, people just roll their eyes because it's almost like, well, I wish I could fly as well, right? It's just not realistic. The second point that I would bring up is that I think there's an important difference between diversifying into stablecoins as opposed to diversifying among different stablecoins. So I think, yes, you want to have some diversity in the treasury. Stablecoins are an obvious go-to for that. But I don't think you want to have all your eggs in one basket, right? Because there are some important distinctions amongst the different stablecoins that if they were to come into play for the one you hold, might make your smart plan to diversify not look so smart in the rearview mirror.
Thanks. And is that because some stablecoins can be turned off or seized, or your wallet address can vanish?
So I think the easy way to look at it is just the oftentimes opaque nature of the backing and the percentage to which the stablecoin is backed by what I would call sort of a viable backing asset, right? So in a perfect world, you'd look at, well, I have 100 stablecoin, it's pegged to the dollar, and there's 100 US dollars in the stablecoin treasury. It's unusual that that's the case. Normally, it's less than 100%, and it's that less than 100%. If it's 99%, that's one thing. If it's 20% and it's in the junk bonds of a third world country for 90% of it, that's a little more concerning, right? So there's a spectrum across the range of stablecoins that I think you need to pay attention to and realize that there are also inherent risks in the stablecoins themselves that need to be accounted for.
just add to that. So, for example, we're a stablecoin fund, right? So 99% of our assets sit in stablecoins, and we hold 13 or 14 different coins at the moment. And I think an important point to keep in mind is that stablecoins, again, not from the legal perspective, but from the business perspective, they're not currency, they're debt, to your point. And this is debt backed by different assets in various shapes and forms with different risk management mechanisms. So just like you wouldn't, put all of your money into one bank account or give one loan to just one company, you always should stay diversified and either understand the nuances or, hire someone who'll do it for you.
That's awesome. But everybody's learning a lot here. So why don't we use the final minutes here to talk about some of the tools that are out there, treasury management, if you have any thoughts on any of them or anything else that you came here with a burning desire to evangelize anybody about.
Well, I'd love to throw in a second shield for DAO that my co-founder Ross Campbell talked about this morning. But seriously, give it a look. It's free to deploy, plus gas, asterisk. But the reason that I bring up DAO as opposed to say something like Gnosis Safe is that it is executory, self-executory. So, we were talking earlier about how most DAOs aren't actually truly decentralized or autonomous. DAO, and I believe there's some other DAO platforms out there that work the same way, will allow you to queue up transactions that are, transactions potentially to move treasury assets or integrate with DeFi contracts that, if the DAO speaks and they say, we want to do this, then when that transaction is confirmed, it just happens. So I'd throw that out there as just an alternative tool to look at, as you consider more traditional things like Gnosis Safe with Snapshot.
Yeah, from my side, in regards to just the tooling, one point that I would also like to mention is that, to me, really in the future, interoperability is here also the key, because there's so many different assets that DAO Treasury can hold, and most of the the Treasury platforms, yet they don't, let's say, allow these assets to be held or displayed even from the front end perspective, right, within their treasuries. So for instance, from our side at MGH, we, for instance, have data tokens in our treasury, and it's also a bit difficult to display them, right? Because there's just not that opportunity out there yet. So I think really the same way we approach it with, the blockchains, the metaverses, really having that agnostic approach and fostering interoperability when it comes to the tooling side and being able to connect the tools, right, to different platforms where they can engage and extract and exchange value with, right? I think that's, to me, really the key here to look at.
Yeah, so I don't have a ton to add, but I would say, and I don't know who was here this morning, but it was a very smart guy, Jeff Costello, spoke this morning after when Ross spoke. And one of the things Jeff said that I really can't sort of reiterate enough is that I think it is important earlier rather than later to get in and get some degree of legal advice, because it's easier to get things put together correctly initially than it is to go back and get it sorted out. It's going to cost you 10 times more. So those would be kind of the only thing I'd add in closing. Thanks everyone for coming.
I think the point of thinking through things ahead of time is very important. There is a natural desire to rush in crypto and build as quickly as you can, but this will come back to haunt you at some point in the future. And it's important not to forget that it's all about decentralization, right? And decentralization is about minimizing the points of failure, right? So if you can be protected on the legal side, if you don't have dependency on one stable coin, on one smart contract, on one signer, or more than one, then you minimize the problems and you can focus on building what you want to build, which is ultimately what we're all here for. So thank you.
So there's still time for, you're not going to get a better panel than this. So if anybody has a question, you want to ask somebody about a treasury, there's a couple seconds left. Here we go, sir.
I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on if you are going to diversify, how you sell that to the community, and how that affects the native governance token and that kind of stuff. Since all of a sudden you're taking on, it might change the value of the original token everyone's holding. You know what I'm saying? So if you diversify and selling that to the community, I don't know, just thoughts on that in general, or your experiences with doing that kind of thing.
All right, so I'll start by saying that I'm not super familiar with what you're talking about, but I do know that there's the potential to borrow against the governance token somehow. I'm not 100% certain of the mechanics, which can allay, I believe, some of the fears you're talking about, because you're not selling governance tokens, you're just diversifying in by borrowing against them, if that makes sense. That's not my original thought. I sort of heard it third hand, and I'm not familiar with the mechanism for how it's done. But I am aware that some people are doing something in that vein.
So from my perspective, that what you said is absolutely possible, but obviously it's a little bit risky, right? Because if your project struggles and your token doesn't do very well for a period of time, and then you lever it up, obviously you'll get into, you'll run into trouble. And the problem with crypto is that the token is liquid usually on day one, which means that it usually runs ahead of the product, ahead of the revenue, and ahead of the cash flow, and it creates short-term incentives. But realistically, the community should be able to understand that the reason why they're buying your token today is so that it hopefully does something later in the future. And if you don't have any reserves to build what you need to build, then it can't go anywhere. So it's about aligning the short-term and the long-term horizon, because the word community is also a bit overused, right? People who go to your Discord and do, and say GM and ask you when moon and when token, they're not necessarily contributing to what you're trying to build, right? You want the users, you want the auditors, you want people who battle test your smart contracts, and that's the alignment. This happens all the time with top quality projects, right? They do treasury diversification where they sell some of the tokens to VCs or public sales or what have you, and without that you can't really fund your business.
Thanks. Any other questions? Anybody? Treasury, stablecoin, multi-sig?
Yeah, so want to get your thoughts on, so you were mentioning how there's some contributors that they're not really contributors, right? So what do you guys think about in terms of splitting up, what people can actually vote on financially versus what they can't vote on financially?
Yeah, I think here, in regards to the finance aspect, I personally have to say I'm a big believer that at some point we'll have a balance between, let's say the utility token governance as well as reputational based governance, where, Vitalik, for instance, wrote an amazing article also about it a couple of months ago that I recommend anyone to read about. I hope I'm not saying something wrong here, but, I'm not the biggest fan of the only utility of a utility token being the governance, because then you really, as also the others mentioned before, you kind of attract kind of more also people that are just in it for the speculation. But you really want to balance out kind of, and make it more attractive for also people that do not have the financial means, but are really motivated and want to proactively contribute, for them to actually increase their governance, not just by financial contributions that they conduct, but actually by positive contributions, which then receive NFT badges, for instance, that then again affect basically positively and increase at the end of the day the voting power for them. So I think that's kind of also an aspect that both further decentralize DAOs and kind of decrease the attack vectors also for, let's say, bad actors to kind of just, acquire a large bunch of the governance token, so to say, and then just kind of, do whatever they like with it, right? So that's kind of my take in regards to also protecting yourself, and also then further at the same time, rewarding the true contributors that are proactively and continuously participating and positively affecting your DAO.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think what you've identified is a trend that I'm seeing as a lawyer, which is general traditional corporate governance principles that have been around forever leaking into DAOs. What is a DAO is kind of a philosophical question, but I think that we're all realizing it can mean a lot of different things, right? And so think about just a regular corporation. Like if I'm a shareholder of Tesla, I don't get to go complain to Elon Musk when he makes some dumb purchase decision. So I think that's kind of what you're describing is, are we going to maybe see DAOs evolve to have different governance models where maybe there's kind of more traditional shareholder board of directors kind of model. And I think the answer is, yeah, absolutely. I think we're definitely going to see that.
All right, thanks. Slides gone, but everybody, Jordan, Nicolas, George, and Evgheny. Look at that memory. Mine like a trap. And
That's why you're an awesome lawyer. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much.
my name is Eric, and I like loyalty points in crypto.